cause I know not, a blast of God smote us. And unexpectedly, from the regions of the east, invaders of obscure race marched in confidence of victory against our land.
In the 17th century BC, the ancient kingdom of Egypt was suddenly overthrown.
They burned our cities ruthlessly, razed to the ground the temples of the gods, and treated all the natives with cruel hostility.
Humiliated by the defeat, the Egyptian pharaoh vowed to reclaim his country. Out of the desert sprang an army of warriors, burning with vengeance. Lulled by centuries of prosperity, Egypt had neglected her army. Secure behind deserts and seas, the pharaohs instead built safeguards for the afterlife. But in 1640 BC, the peace of the kingdom was shattered. The Hyksos, a Middle Eastern tribe who had settled among the Egyptians 100 years before, rose against their hosts. Exploiting the death of the pharaoh, they seized power. The Hyksos had taken a rich prize indeed, the gift of the Nile. A fertile band of floodplain that chased the river for 700 miles. Every July, the Nile overflowed, making the desert bloom. Farmers had only to scatter their seeds on the rich silt left in the river's wake to reap 2 harvests a year. Now, the Hyksos held sway over this land. The new pharaoh's realm was confined to the region around Thebes, far south along the Nile. Egyptian nobles chafed under the Hyksos rule. They looked with scorn upon these intruders who dressed ostentatiously, spoke their language with a strange accent, and dishonored their gods. No Egyptian was more outraged than the pharaoh Kamose.
Here I sit. No man can settle down being despoiled by the imposts of the Asiatics. I will grapple with him, that I may cut open his belly. My wish is to save Egypt.
Kamose did grapple with the Hyksos, but his wish was not fulfilled. His successor, Ahmosis, was also forced to suffer the taunts of the Hyksos. He was forbidden to stock the royal pool with the sacred hippopotamus. The Hyksos king, 500 miles to the north, claimed that the animal's noise kept him from sleeping. Ahmosis swore to drive the Hyksos out of Egypt, but he lacked the means. The power of the pharaohs rested on a small bodyguard. During wartime, this skeleton army was reinforced with conscripts, who were dismissed as soon as the war ended. From his exile in Thebes, the pharaoh Ahmosis began to build a new institution in Egypt, a standing army 1,000 strong and growing by the day. One of his recruits was a young man named Akhmos. Inscribed on the walls of his tomb is a rare account of the life of a soldier.
The crew commander, Akhmos, son of Abana the Justified, speaks as follows. I grew up in the town of Nekheb.
In the time of the Hyksos, the Egyptians were forced to pay tribute to their new masters in grain, livestock, or whatever goods they could afford. Throughout Egypt, professions were handed down from father to son. The son of a scribe would be educated as a scribe. The son of a craftsman would be apprenticed to the family trade.
My father was a soldier of the king. I took service as a soldier in his stead on the ship the Wild Bull in the time of Ahmosis, when I was young and had not taken a wife.
Young men were eager to join the army, both to expel the Hyksos and to escape poverty. Success in battle offered the chance of reward. In his new life as a soldier, Akhmos learned the first rule of the military: obedience. He was issued a uniform, short linen kilt and light leather shield, and his hair was shorn to mark him as a soldier and forge a bond with his comrades. In the deserts around Thebes, out of sight of the Hyksos spies who plied the Nile, Akhmos was trained to exhaustion.
Come, let me tell you the woes of the soldier. He's awakened at any hour. One is after him as after a donkey, toils until darkness. He's hungry, his belly hurts. He's dead while yet alive. When he receives his grain ration, it's not good for grinding. He's called up, he may not rest. There are no clothes, no sandals. His march is uphill through mountains. He drinks water every third day. It's smelly and tastes of salt. His body is ravaged by illness.
Braced for a long campaign against an unbeaten adversary, the pharaoh Ahmosis gathered his forces at Thebes. He aimed to attack the Hyksos in Avaris, their capital in the Nile Delta. With an entire army to equip, the workshops of Thebes echoed with the din of a people mobilizing for war. In forges throughout the city, even the craftsmen of the temple were enlisted in the task of beating plowshares into swords. Raised by the broad waters of the Nile and trained as a sailor, Ahmose was put to work as a deckhand.
I was taken upon the ship Northern because I was valiant.
In ships crowded with horses and chariots, Ahmose and his comrades set sail upon the Nile. Throughout the 10-day journey, lookouts scanned the banks for the enemy, who might be lying in ambush among the palms. The Hyksos tried to barricade the broad river with boats and chains, but failed. Instead, the Egyptians carried their own surprise, an army of thousands, well-trained like their foe, but fighting on their own soil for their own land. Reaching the marshy delta near the Mediterranean, Ahmose and his comrades disembarked and marched upon the Hyksos strongholds around Avaris. As the Egyptian warriors assembled for battle, some brandished weapons far more formidable than the clubs, knives, and spears that most carried. The Pharaoh's army would turn the weapons of the Hyksos against them: a long-range bow, a strong sword, and armor to protect the body. And the greatest innovation of all, the chariot. Strong yet swift, light and maneuverable, rows of chariots deployed on a broad plain would thunder down upon the enemy and break their ranks. Then they would turn and charge from the rear. For every foot soldier wounded, dozens more panicked and scattered. Unstoppable, the chariots could put an entire army to flight. The young soldier Ahmose may have fought in the elite infantry unit known as the Strong Arm Boys. Trained to engage at close quarters, they charged the Hyksos wielding spears. Other soldiers carried a bronze-headed axe, a curved sword, or a throw stick, a weapon much like a boomerang, and able to wound or kill. Behind Ahmose, archers showered the Hyksos lines with a deadly rain. The attack was led by the pharaoh Ahmose himself.
I followed the sovereign on foot when he rode on his chariot. When the town of Avaris was besieged, I fought bravely on foot in His Majesty's presence.
As the Hyksos were struck down, the Egyptians cut off the hands of the dead as proof of their courage. These bloody relics brought Akhmos reward. A golden necklace and a golden dagger, the gold of valor.
There was fighting on the water near Avaris. I made a seizure and carried off a hand. When it was reported to the Royal Herald, the gold of valor was given to me.
The Hyksos, conquerors of Egypt, now found themselves surrounded. Akhmos continued to distinguish himself, gathering prizes and promotions.
There was fighting in Egypt to the south of this town, and I carried off a man as a living captive. I went down into the water, for he was captured on the city side, and crossed the water carrying him. When it was reported to the Royal Herald, I was rewarded with gold once more.
The Pharaoh's army at last stormed Avaris. The city was put to the torch.
I brought spoil from there. 1 man, 3 women. His Majesty gave them to me as slaves.
The Hyksos usurpers were crushed, and the ruler of Thebes once again became Pharaoh of all Egypt. Emboldened by success, the Pharaoh Ahmosis sent his armies to conquer lands beyond his borders: Palestine, Syria, and Eastern Africa. When a new pharaoh took power, Akhmos was sent south to attack the Nubians.
And His Majesty proceeded to make a great slaughter among them. I brought spoil thence, 2 living men and 3 hands, and I was rewarded with gold afresh. 2 female slaves were given to me, and His Majesty returned home, his heart being glad in valor and victory.
Just as the Hyksos had exacted tribute from the Egyptians, now the pharaoh compelled defeated nations to send tribute to him. For Egypt, the conquests of the pharaoh's armies were a turning point. As the rulers who followed Ahmosis built upon his victories, they ushered in an age of imperial splendor. Life as a soldier of the pharaoh had brought Akhmos great wealth. Many times over he had won gold, slaves, and honor. Few soldiers fared so well.
The enemy comes, surrounds him with missiles, and life recedes from him. He's told, "Quick, forward, valiant soldier, win for yourself a good name." His body is weak, his legs fail him. If he comes out alive, he's worn out from marching. If he joins the deserters, all his people are imprisoned. He dies on the edge of a desert, and there are none to perpetuate his name. He suffers in death as in life. He's placed in a sack.
Fate was cruel to abandon a soldier to rot on a distant battlefield. In the harsh life of ancient Egypt, men comforted themselves with thoughts of an easier life in eternity. Because death sent the soul into exile, the corpse had to be preserved for its journey into the next world. Only after the body had been ritually purged, embalmed, mummified, or buried could the soul re-enter it and find peace. Ahmose was more fortunate than most warriors. On average, a man lived only 38 years. Ahmose survived well into his 50s. When he retired with honors from the pharaoh's service, he was granted the great privilege of burial in a tomb. Choosing a site high in the cliffs overlooking his hometown of Nekheb, Ahmose